Let's unmute our mics. Let's unmute our mics. I'll start with the top. Ro Brady, please introduce yourself to the folks out there in our audience.
Hi, my name is Ro Brady. I'm an indie author. I am a retired school teacher, and I am currently the director of recruitment and curriculum for the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. What else can I tell you about myself? I live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
And we have our newest members, Carla and Dave. Is it David or Dave? Because your name on here is Dave.
David is fine, either way.
Okay, and David, they're also authors, but we'll get co-author and co-authors. That's what I call them. But they're new here. Please tell us, myself, and introduce yourself to our group, because you guys are now in our group. This is our first time seeing you. Welcome, welcome to ESP Book Chats. Do tell us about you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Ellen. So my name's Dr. Dave Bettenhausen. I'm the Vice President of Medical Affairs at a small Midwestern hospital in Ohio. I'm retired from my private practice. Carla's had about 40 years of healthcare experience, including being my office manager. We're both co-writers of 4 different books and have a couple other books we're currently working on. We also cohabitate together. So if that tells your listeners a little bit about us. I know that we come with a slightly different perspective than some of the people you've had on here before. I'm going to introduce us as monotheist Unitarians. Maybe that'll help a little bit.
Yes, do tell me what that is, because I'm not sure what that is, but we'll get into that as you describe, as you talk about your book.
Okay, so again, so monotheist Unitarians, we believe God does have the ultimate moral authority. Just so that kind of gives some of those listenings. Carla and I were both raised Catholic, so we have a relatively diverse religious background, which you'll find out some about us in the future here. Again, we write in 2 specific genres. One is very spiritual, and it's quite significantly tied to reincarnation. And the other one is in past life memories. And the other one, because we're so interested in past life memories, we write a lot of historical novels and historical fictions. And so those sort of tie together with us. So that might tell you a little bit about us. Our main message is to live a life without conceit, selfishness, jealousy, and unforgiveness, and to make all choices out of love. And we do believe that pretty much the golden rule, which is love your neighbors as yourself and love God with your whole heart, mind, body, and soul.
Thank you so much. Beautifully said. And Queenie Clem, do let the folks know who you are. She is our ambassador, literary ambassador, but I'll let her go ahead and blow her own horn. Go ahead, Queenie.
Hey everyone, I'm Queenie Clem, the literary ambassador. I'm from South Carolina, and I have been an educator for 26 years, and I promote authors. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. So this is the book that we're going to talk about, and the author is not here. Normally we do have authors on the page, but for those of you that's been watching and been listening, Ellen Sutter of ESP Presents and ESP Book Chat, I am the CEO of ESP Presents as well as the book club owner. So that's about me. And tonight this is our book of the month. It was a 2-month book of the month, and we all had busy lives, and we got a chance to read the book. And this is titled, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race. And this author is Beverly Daniel Tatum. She's PhD. And this book is in its 20th anniversary of the edition. We do get to see some modern stuff in here. And we're going to go ahead
I need
and
my water.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you fine, Ellen.
Okay, so we're about to get into this and we're just going to open up. We all have our different perspective. We are a very diverse group, as you guys can see. So I ask you guys something and we're opening up and we're being honest. And so I'm going to ask, starting like we did with Ro, and then we'll go around as we did, and then y'all two together. Ro, growing up, or just you as a person, you individually, what stereotype were you taught about Black people? Well, you on mute. You on mute.
I'm sorry. I said, well, I guess as a Black child growing up in a melting pot community, I say that I lived in the North and the South because both of my parents were from the South. So in the summers, I spent most of my childhood in the South. But growing up in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh was one of those neighborhoods where a lot of immigrants found themselves. And also a lot of Blacks came to that part of the North during the Great Exodus, when a lot of the Blacks were leaving the South. So as far as stereotypes, in my neighborhood in Pittsburgh, we were a working class family. And most of the people in my neighborhood were a working class family. So I never really understood how, I was affected by race until I left that neighborhood.
Mhm.
When I left that neighborhood, that's when I really realized that people viewed me as differently. And I think the first time I really encountered racism was in school. I had teachers who literally didn't like Black kids. So that's why when I saw the title of this book, I said, oh, wow, I can really relate to it. So my first real experience with racism was a young child in elementary school.
Okay, Dave and Carla.
So this is, as we tell our stories, it'll be slightly different. I, of course, grew up in a very small town in Iowa. We had no Black families in town. My dad was a high school principal. My mom was a secretary. I might fall in one of those categories where we were taught that it didn't matter. My first experience was, as a kid, was really a wrestling tournament where I went and had to wrestle a young Black boy. And my dad was all concerned whether it would bother me. And I was like, should it? I didn't think it was I really didn't think it was anything I should even think about. We certainly had economic disparity in our community, but as a small farming community, it wasn't spread out by very much. The greatest, which I'll say is kind of strange, is we had two Catholic churches. One was the German Catholic Church and one was the Irish Catholic Church in town. And they were on different sides of the tracks even. And everybody on the south side of town went to one and everybody on the north side went to a different one. And so when we came together finally in ninth grade, we came together and we were all in the same school. But it wasn't like having to address somebody who was of different color. It just never happened until I really got to college. And then it was a matter of, we had other Black students on our dorm floor. And again, it's at the University of Iowa, so it's probably, 10% Black and 90% white in general, just because Iowa is so close. I mean, if you didn't live in Des Moines or Waterloo or Fort Dodge, we didn't have big enough communities where we even everybody was white and a farm boy. Carly could tell a different story.
Carla?
I was raised in South Boston. We were not wealthy. I would say that the first prejudice that I was aware of was between my parents. My father was 100% Italian and my mother was English Scottish. So at their wedding, apparently my father's side all wore black to the wedding. And of course, my mother didn't like this in the least. My mother didn't see color, race, anything. We went to school with everybody, black, blue, purple, yellow, it didn't matter.
Mhm.
And my mother's motto was, everybody is one of God's children and you treat everybody the same. Now, when my parents divorced, we moved to Detroit with my stepfather, who was, I hate to say this, but a very evil man. And that was the first time that we ever heard racial slurs that came out of his mouth. He worked in factories and he said the most horrible things. And I will tell you that my mother and he fought many times
Mhm.
over the things that he said. And we just were not raised that way.
Wow. Queenie? Is Queenie there?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. You said what were some of the stereotypes that I heard growing
Yeah.
up?
Yeah,
Well, I
growing
heard
up.
like, ma'am,
Yes. What did you
Oh.
hear growing up?
like we were lazy and dumb. She's a Jezebel. Oh, they all eat watermelon and chicken and Uncle Tom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those are the stereotypes I heard.
Now, me growing up, I grew up pretty much like Carla and David did. In my household, even though my father was from Jackson, Mississippi, he raised us up north. And in our household, we were raised Christian. And there was not, white this, black that, none of that. We was not taught that kind of way. Even growing up, we were predominantly white and black in our area. There was a white family that lived next to us. We rarely seen the husband and wife outside. I'm talking about, I'm 5 years old and I will never forget this. So I am 5 years old playing, she's white, I'm black. And they lived there so quickly. It seemed like this happened in a matter. They lived there probably less than some months, but our playtime together, me and this girl, I cannot remember her name. I just remember the incident. So she came outside and she hugged me for dear life. She said, I cannot play with you anymore because my mom said Black people are dirty. And I'm going, okay. So we kissed each other. And I remember her having to go quickly in the house. And they must have moved in the midnight hour because they didn't live there no more. I don't know when they moved, but they moved. And so with that, actually got to high school. If you're Black, get back. If you're white, you're right. N-word, go home, all over the bathrooms. When Roots came on, that was our first time seeing something like that. Amongst ourselves as Black people, we were saying, your name is Toby, but we didn't hear that from white people saying that. But when we got to just seeing the movie and just being in your neighborhood, but when we got to school, my area is predominantly Black, and certain areas have a mixture of Black and white. Stager, Illinois, that's up in a predominantly white area. I do remember that after seeing Roots, there was a guy, the guy called him the N-word. And all I remember is you have a long window, like a long plate window. He threw him through it. And then later on, we dispersed to our classes. And then all of a sudden, everybody was being called out to go home. So everybody that lived in the white area went home. When we got outside, there was already, they were already in their gear, riot gear and everything, bricks and all that. So I got bricked. and I got bricked. I remember somebody shielded me, but I got hit with a mason brick in my side. So when we get on the bus driver is white. So we're Black. I think she understood the assignment. And what I mean by that is she didn't try to do anything but drive us back home. So we are 2 miles from the school. So she drove us about 1.5 miles in. And so the kids on the bus, they beat her face so bad that I couldn't tell it was a face. So she was all bloody, and she got us as far, because she couldn't see anymore because the blood was all in her face, and she let us out. She did not try to retaliate. So that was my worst experience of seeing that firsthand. And she let us go home. So I don't know whatever become of her, but I know she took that beating. She was bruised, and I will never forget that. And so that was my experience there, but we always got that, saying this and that, but we was not raised that way. So I know that was lengthy, but that was a scar for me to have that to happen, and the different stereotypes in that way. So we all seem to be, all of us were diverse. At the same time, Carla and David have a very different thing, because I didn't know, especially being white, and you say, okay, well, what did he do? And it's a very humbling experience to hear from you both, and you don't have the background that society have us to believe that the privilege. I didn't hear that, out of your mouths or anything like that. So
Ellen, can I tell one more little story?
Yes, you can.
I finally got done with medical school residency, and I ended up living in a small town in Ohio. And a gentleman that I call a very dear friend of mine came in with his daughter to be treated in the office. And he just asked me, have you ever played golf, Doc? And I said, yeah. And he goes, I need a sub tonight in golf league. Now, George is Black, but George became a good friend of mine, and I went and played golf with him because, again, it didn't really matter to me what color George was. But I went to play golf with George. But then I learned about George's story. And I think it's a good one for this, because George told me how he grew up in Ohio. And we're talking in the mid 1950s. And he started to tell me the story, and he said, every day my dad went out and stood on the front porch. And every day this truck came back by with an open bed, and Dad ran out and jumped on with 60 other Black men. And they drove him down to the brickyard, and they made bricks all day. And at the end of the day, he was driven back on the same truck, and they drove through their little community that had 50 little 2-bedroom houses. And he said, if you had 4 kids, you still had a 2-bedroom house. If you had 10 kids, you had a 2-bedroom house. And the father would jump off and run back in because mom had made dinner for the night. And he goes, we had one little Baptist church down at the end of the bottom of the hill. And he goes, and every day, every Friday, Dad got paid with money that was blue. The only place the blue money was good was at the company store. The only doctor they could see was the company doctor. The only place they could buy clothes. They all went to the same company school. And then as George is telling me this, he started to talk about how he lost the hearing in his ear because he couldn't see any other doctor because they had no other real money. And I realized George literally grew up in a slave town, even though they didn't call it a slave town.
Wow.
That was still in the 50s. And I was like, George, your dad was almost a slave. He goes, yes, after I lost the hearing in one ear, Dad walked out of town and walked to the next town where he found somebody who gave him a ride to the next town where he got a job at a regular factory. And he bought a car, and 3 years later, he drove back in his car and picked us all up and left. Because he didn't know that that's the way, and George said, I didn't know I was growing up that way. But when I lost my hearing, my dad was so mad that there was no way to see a qualified doctor, only the company doctor.
Wow.
And so those are stories that still exist in the United States that shouldn't.
Yes,
So
Yeah.
I think I can understand part of why she wrote this book.
yes. And I love this book. I do. It was hard for me to pick it up, but if you guys turn to page 83, that's where we're going to start at. And we're just going to talk. And I'm glad we're having this conversation. So we're going to talk about this. And this, I believe, in this forum, David,
Yeah.
Ro, and Queenie, all of us that are here, we get to talk about this. Society doesn't want to talk about this. They want to just somehow just go away from this and say that we don't have a problem. And so I'm learning as an adult that 2020, 2021, the millennials of today is now causing a conversation to come forth. And I think we need to talk about it. And I think we need to not strip one of their culture, but to understand, just like you guys been in our group. I seen your picture, like, you know how when you look at your Facebook page, you don't want a bubble, you want it to have a face. So anybody could put up a face. So looking at your names and stuff, I didn't say, well, maybe they're Black. I knew that from your name, I'd say, well, they're not Black, but I didn't think white. so I know
we're definitely white. Yes, I think that's probably true. And if you think that reading this book or listening part of it on Audible was easy, it was not.
It wasn't.
It's extremely uncomfortable the entire length of the book.
Oh, for me too, as a person of color, I was like, first picking it up, I was like, here we go again. Will we get through this? And it was a lot of statistic that I was listening to, and I said, let me just listen. Let me just sit down and learn to listen. I got as far as up to chapter 9. So I got the book in the audio, and she reads very well. So in saying a lot of the stuff, we came in contact today with this stuff that she's talking about. So we're going to talk about page 83. That's the number 1, defining racism. What struck out of y'all mind in this, just this chapter alone is very meaty. I highlighted some things. Did you guys highlight some things?
Well, I did not, Helen, but that's okay.
That's okay. So what came to your mind? Anybody can just go, but just let me know who you are. So, so I'll know who's talking. You can raise your hand literally, or raise your hand on the Zoom thing. So did I see Carla's hand go up?
Sure.
Okay, Carla, defining racism, what did you find in here? What popped out to you? What was very interesting? And I highlighted a lot of stuff. So the question is for everybody.
I can sum it up in one word. Racism equals ego.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you believe you're better than somebody else for whatever reason, it is your ego. And, in our first book, Dave mentioned it already, we talk about the 5 simple rules. When you're living a life with ego, that consists of being conceited, jealous, selfish, and unforgiving. And if that's how you live your life, there's no room for love and for compassion. I mean, case after case she put in here. It's not how I was raised. I know it happens in a lot of areas, but there's no excuse for it, no matter who you are.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to say to you, Carla, since you said that, and I'm looking and now in my adult life, but I hadn't heard in my young life about white privilege. I know what it looks like in action, but I didn't put the name on it until now in 2021. Now we're in 22. And so now that I see it and I'm older, so you turned the table for me in talking with you. And what I mean by that is you're not getting into the mold of white privilege. Although if you went out in public and I went out in public, you would get that privilege. So to me, when I hear white privilege, I see again what it means. But for me, my definition of that is getting something, whether it calls to kill someone to get your best right. That's what it is, a definition for me. So I don't see it as, I know it, like I say, the term white privilege, but you're stepping over someone to have that privilege.
Mhm.
And when it's a privilege given, you know, still to the day, I can go in the store and it'll say, hello, before I can even get in the door.
Uh-huh.
Or, you know, different things. It's still to this day. And so Dave, what was your idea on this first chapter, defining racism for you?
Again, part of this, again, like I said, was a little bit uncomfortable because I never considered myself racist. Now, and that's probably actually not true. You know, I think of myself as not racist. I have Black friends. I went to school. I never considered it an issue. It's different than, as you say, there's some sort of an issue related to white privilege. I never felt I had a privilege because I never took a privilege. There's a difference between saying I'm taking a privilege or that I got one sort of by accident just because of the way I was born. Now that's how I feel, because I don't feel that there is anyone who's of color that is worse, best, better, different than me. Now, I grew up in a little town where they told us we were all going to college. And so I went to college. Now, I don't know if that's white privilege. It certainly was economic privilege to some extent. When I went to college, there were people of color there, and I thought they were there because they wanted to go to school, just like I did. However, I never considered that their economic situation would make it more difficult. I mean, I borrowed money to go all the way through school, so I figured anybody could borrow money all the way to go through school. I went to medical school, graduated with $180,000 in debt. You know, it's a lot of money because my folks didn't pay for me to go to school, but I was still expected to go to school. Somewhere when we start talking about white privilege, we have to start somewhere in education, teaching young Black kids they can go to school, that they can go to college, that they can succeed. I know in reading the book, was concerned, you know, that, you know, the author was at Spelman College, and a young Black man or a young Black woman shouldn't have to go to Spelman College to get a good education.
Mhm.
You know, but if they feel like they're underadvantaged at another school, I can understand that that's a problem. I don't know, you know, again, at Iowa, it's whoever was left on the floor, we all ran down to eat together. And it's so strange because as freshmen, you could sit at a table with 40 guys and you know, only 4 of them were Black because that's all that were living on your floor. But none of us thought it was strange.
Wow.
You know, so and again, part of that is, you know, if you even look at the statistics, probably the 10% of Blacks that were in school with me was almost a higher percentage than you would expect, because I think the population of Iowa at that time was 7% Black.
Mm.
So, you know, I never considered it strange or different.
Wow. Ro, and it's defining racism. What came out? What did you see more in?
I think thinking about my original comment of my first experiences with racism was back in grade school. And even the author talks about, even in our preschool years, we are exposed to misinformation about people different from ourselves. And many of us grew up in neighborhoods where we had limited opportunities to interact with people different from our own families. And my experience as a young child in my neighborhood was quite different from that, because I grew up in a melting pot neighborhood where there were Germans living on the other side of the street, or Polish living on the side of the street where I lived at, Italians. And what gave us a commonality was the fact that our parents were all working class. But what made us different was coming from a Black family and having very little, you know. But the thing, Black poverty and white poverty are very different. Um, you could come from an economical status where, you know, you may struggle with finding a job, keeping a job, or you can come from an economical status where you have a job, but it doesn't pay you very much. And in my family, my father was our only breadwinner. And I didn't even realize how little we had, you know, because he did so much. But then there were other people in our neighborhood who, because they weren't living, you know, my story, were also poor, but a poor for them was so totally different, because it not necessarily affected economical status. It affected social status, if that makes sense. Like being able to get things on credit, not because you didn't have the money, was because whether or not that store owner wanted to give it to you or not. You could have had the money, but you know, he may not have wanted to give it to you simply because of your color. And that was what I found stood out for me with, you know, what the author was saying, that I did experience that as a child, you know, of my parents, you know, trying to get something on credit, having the money, but not being able to get it, you know, and living next door to somebody who was probably making just the same, living in the same type of environment that we were living in, but maybe making less or more money than we were making, and being able to get the credit, you know, regardless of their their economical status, but simply because of their color, if that makes sense. You know, so I've experienced racism at a young age, but living it through my parents' eyes made me realize, that was when I saw, like, wow, things are not equal. You know, somebody who maybe have the same type of job, but makes more money than my father did, and that is able to go out and get things on credit. And then my father doing the same thing, you know, and having the same job, but making less money than they did, and still was not even able to go out and get things on credit, even despite he had enough money to pay for what he wanted on credit. And that was when the inequality started for me.
Yeah, I know. I can remember, like, with my father, even though we were a family of 13, my mom is deaf. She's not speaking as well. And so he was the sole breadwinner. We grew up very poor, but because my dad made too much money, but because he had a lot of family, he could afford to live in the projects because he had more kids. So it was like debt to ratio. You got a lot of kids, you make a lot of money. Let's look at the kids that he have. So we was able to live in a 5-bedroom projects. You know, some people right now today would call it a condominium or stuff like that. But we had, we had 4 bedrooms and 2 restrooms. And we had a full bath, and a full bath and a downstairs half. And so, you know, I'm looking at that. And then my dad had real good credit. And like Ro mentioned about the stores, he could go in there and get credit, and they could know that, you know, okay, we call it a due bill, you know, where you can go in and you can get credit, and you had to have, you know, your word was your bond. So my dad was able to go in there He was able to get groceries. I didn't find that out till I was older, that I realized, still a teenager, that he was able to go in there and sometime, wait to payday, and he was good on what he did. So he was always to do it. And then the guy in the community, our store, the guy that was there is Di Giulio. He's Italian, and he's in the middle of the hood, the only Italian at the store, and he had some Black people working with him. But it was very prejudiced back then, but he stood in there, and we just found out within, I guess, 3 to 5 years ago, his daughter, Julia, she wrote on Facebook, "My dad died. He wanted me to let y'all know." That community. He was 80 years old. He died about like maybe 5 to 4 years ago, but he stayed in there, and they used to rob the store and stuff. He still would open up, and they did not understand, why are you staying in this neighborhood? And as I got older, I realized he said he wanted us to be better. And that we did in that era. We was able to be there. We had a good communication with him until I don't know how long, but I had moved on, and he was still there until he could work that. But that was one thing I understand, that he knew that we meant more. We in that community meant more than anything. And so now that community is boarded up, I mean, like all around. And I looked up the statistic, and, what is it like in my community since like this day and time. Is one of the poorest in America, where I came from. And so I'm looking at that. And it's not going up, it's just going down. And living in the projects is one of those things that when I was growing up, they said it was a project. So a project to have a class of people to live in a certain area and just let them die off, and then they rebuild. So it became a way of life where, when I left, the people my age group, their children's children, and they couldn't afford it. The rent was $3. And so the mindset is a lot of drugs and crime. They couldn't afford $3, and they wouldn't allow them to pay the money up ahead. So yeah, so that is really what that is. So that's defining a lot of things. So that was good. I think Queenie, I know she had to work, so she's not there anymore, but anything else in this one with the defining racism, and then we'll go to the next one. And you guys could just pull out what you thought of this book, what was going on in your minds about this. Ro, you had something in your notes, or Dave or Carla, something in your notes that you wanted to talk about, that you want to highlight your own self. So I just had that.
Ellen, I understand the Italian man that lived in your neighborhood. My father, being 100% Italian, they came over from Italy. 3 brothers married 3 sisters. And my father forbid us to tell people we were Italian. He said he was called Wop, Dago, Guinea, all of the above. He wouldn't let us speak it. He went so far as to not eat Italian food. He never wanted anybody to know. He was so ashamed of it. And of course, my mother, my mother's always believed you're proud of who you are, regardless. And my mother's father was a very bigoted man. He worked at Boston Edison. And at that time, Boston Edison was hiring deaf mutes. And he would come home and make fun of them. And my mother would say, be careful what you do, because that's the quickest way to create karma. Just wait and see what happens to you. And don't you know, my grandfather ended up with throat cancer. He couldn't talk, and nobody could understand him. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So we learned a lot of lessons early on. My mother didn't let us make fun of anybody or anything.
Well, Carla, you brought me, and Ro, I know you said something, but what you brought some to my attention, Carla, in the book, when they were talking about not only society see color as only Black, we see our Latinx, our Asian, all of those, we have those color American, we have people of color, but they only think Black. And so it brings me to the story at this book, is when you mentioned that about your I think you said grandfather, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember in the story, if you went that far, and maybe you, Ro, when this girl, she's Spanish, and so they teach them once they get here to strip away their language, and they don't talk about it, or different cultures, they strip it away so that you can't talk about it or learn it or do anything, because sort of against the law if you talk about that. And to one of the a group of a group, certain nationality, they was very ashamed to be who they were. They were very, this one girl, Latinx, she was very ashamed because she wanted to hide and be in the, what they call the norm. White is the norm. She wanted to hide behind that because she wanted to fit in. And then as she got older, she realized that she didn't even know her language. And she was very ashamed, from having an ego to very ashamed that she didn't know anything, to going to high school, happened to be taught it. And so I know too, like in my family, we're a melting pot. My sister, her husband is white. We have children. My brother, his wife is Mexican. And some of the kids, his kids, they call themselves Blaxican because that's Black and Mexican. And so the mom still speak, my sister-in-law, she still speaks Spanish. And so being here, they were taught not to speak it, to where they can hear her saying it, but they can't speak it back. Oh. Whereas one of them could speak it, but she still talked to them so they can pick it back up. And so that's one of the things that they wanted to hold on to that. Ro, do you remember what you were going to say?
Oh, I was just going back to defining racism. I don't really think racism was defined for me until, like I said before, I was sort of raised in the North and the South because my parents were from the South. And my father was very dedicated to his family. So every summer we'd pack up the car and head back down south, where we'd spend most of the summer. And he was a son of a sharecropper. So we'd go back to that little piece of land and we literally would help them, with their crops. But I think living in the South was where, for me, where racism was defined, when I really had that sense of understanding. My father was from a family of 16. And like I said, he was a sharecropper. So he had to, quit school. I think he might have finished the 6th or 7th grade. He only had one brother and the rest of them were all girls, 16 of them. So his one brother had one son, and that they started a little trucking company. I think they might have had 3 or 4 trucks. And his son went into a gas station, and it was owned by 2 white men. And the night that he went in there, it was raining. And he never liked to carry his wallet in his pants pocket because he would sit on it. So he would put it in his breast pocket. So he's going in there and he went to pull out his wallet out of his breast pocket. But before he did that, he pulled out a cigarette lighter, and it was a shiny cigarette lighter. And they said it was a gun. So they shot him right through the window. And my father was a very soft spoken man. But even as a young child, I remember, because we were here in the North in Pittsburgh, and I can remember sitting in the kitchen and us finding out what had happened to my father's only nephew, my cousin, and the rage that it caused in my father. And that was when racism really hit home for me, of really being able to define that there were people who thought we were different. There were people who thought we were less. And going to that memorial service was, I think it was life defining for me, because it set me on a stage of understanding that there would always be people that I would encounter that would think of me as being less, that would think of me as being different. And I went back home as a different, and I was a young child. I was probably 12 or 13. I went back home that day, really understanding that I was not always going to be liked by everybody. So that was the defining moment for me.
Wow, that is a lot. And again, I can't thank you, Dave and Carla, enough that we are having this conversation. And then we may have our own feelings within, but me talking to you because we were raised different in society, think it
I
doesn't
think
make
the
me look at you
conversation's
like that.
important.
It's very important to have this conversation. And I don't see, like, I know growing up, like she's like here again, defining racism is like growing up. And I remember I'm walking the street and a white person, a white woman, she has a pocketbook, she clutch it real tight as if I'm going to steal from her,
Yeah.
you know, or, you know, hiding their girls and not letting them be around because they think that the Black man is going to rape them. So different stuff like that, we hear all of that. And so having this conversation is a good thing. I think that we should have more conversation and to understand that because I'm Black and you're white doesn't mean anything. Like I see, like you said, if you cut, like what Pastor said, if you cut us, we both gonna bleed red.
Mhm.
No
Absolutely.
matter what color you're gonna bleed red. And I believe that being Black, society, and we read in this book that not only, remember, we have more than just Black people as brown people. And it seems like in the book, all those people that were brown people, they were things going on, systemic racism, that it had to be written into the laws. It had to be written into the law that a Black person cannot marry a white person. I'm going like, that has to be a law. I can see if she's marrying a dog or a cat, but she's marrying a human being. And I always say, until society see us as human beings, I think they would look through lenses and have a different perspective on us being human beings.
Yeah, we need to do something about that, because until we realize that, much like your pastor said, we're all the same, except for the amount of melanin in our skin. I mean, that's almost ridiculous. And I hate to say, I went out and I was trying to do my own little history research. And we've been doing this for thousands of years. The same thing. They did it in India. And when I found this little bit of information, I was like, still shocked. The Indians in northern India, when they migrated from the north, were light-skinned brown. And the ones in southern India were dark-skinned brown. And when they finally got done and they became a continent and they set up the caste system, all the Brahminists, which were from the northern part of India, were all in the top caste and they were light brown. And all of those who were from southern part of India, which most of them had migrated from Ethiopia and up thousands of years ago, they were all in the worker class and in the lowest caste. And I'm looking at India, and what they started to do is say, you can't marry outside of your caste, because if you marry outside of your caste, we won't be able to tell because your skin colors will all average out. You know, it's sort of becomes the, you know, when they started saying mulatto because people were black and white.
Yes.
And you look at that and you think, why did we have to make a new term?
Yeah.
It's really, the melanin just averages out. So
Yeah.
some people are more dark than others, some are less dark than others. I heard people talking about the Ukraine today, saying that the Ukraine has more Asian, and so they actually don't tan as well. And I thought, what are we talking about in the middle of a war with Russia, that the Ukrainians have a different colored skin than the Russians? And I thought, I'm appalled.
Mhm.
How could that be part of the conversation? Is there worrying about economic war and people being bombed and people dying?
Yeah.
And it's all based on just the amount of a chemical that's in our skin.
Wow.
It has nothing to do with our heart. It has nothing to do with what we think. It may have something to do with how we are brought up culturally,
Yes.
because we're from different countries.
Mhm.
Certainly the history of the United States having slavery is a terrible thing. However, the United States, for being a country that's 200 years old, has at least moved in the right direction. It keeps trying to, it eliminated slavery finally.
Mhm.
It's tried to respond, much like she says in her book, it has tried to do some affirmative action to try to even things out,
Mhm.
but we're still failing as a
Yeah.
country.
I'm
I-
glad that, I'm glad for, like I said, 2020 and 21, because we never, every time when we have this conversation, they turn it into something else. And so growing up, I don't know if you guys heard this or, but I was told, and I don't know where it came from, the 1% blood. I heard this growing up. I don't know where it came from, but if 1% of Black blood is in there,
One
then
drop.
you're Black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
'Cause
one drop
like-
theory.
Yeah. What
Ridiculous.
theory was that?
It's the one drop theory. I think she even talks about it
Yeah.
in the book.
And it's just crazy because I think the fight is not that I'm Black, but that if you mix with the white blood, that the white blood is deleted. And I think that's more the fight than it is my skin color. Because like I said, my sister, her husband is white. And so people ask him, and her kids, you would think she's babysitting because they're more white than they are Black. And so they ask her husband, they know her son is Black, mixed with Black. Are you gonna raise him Black? He's like, what? I'm gonna raise him like a man. I'm not gonna be raising him whether he's Black or white. I'm gonna raise him like a man. And he thought that was just a silly question. And that's what society wants to know on the birth certificate. If you're white, if the mother is white and the child, she had that child, she can say that child is white. And so from that experience, it was one lady, when I was in Chicago, when I was in California, I lived, it's like a apartment building that this is the front of it, and my building sits this way. So that would be the side of my building in front of hers. And so she is white. And she's told me that she was intimate with a Black man and a white man. So she said, after I have my baby, I don't know why she picked me to do this, but I'm friendly and everything. And so she said, after I have my baby, I want you to tell me if the baby is Black or white. So she brought the baby over for me to see. The ear color, everything is light, little fingers, probably a little brown and stuff like that. And I told her, I said, your baby is Black. She's like, how you know? It's got straight hair and the color is real light. I said, we don't come out Black. We come out real light, straight hair. We don't just come out with nappy hair. Some of us do have nappy hair at birth, but not as rare. And so when the baby was about 2 months, she starts seeing the different color change. 3 years old, the baby is a beautiful cinnamon color and got hair like hers. Well, here's the deal. On the birth certificate, it says she's white, but her skin color is my color. So now she had problems in school because her birth certificate said she was white. So that's the kind of things that we go through in our society. We are, if I'm Black, my child is going to be Black because I'm a Black woman. But I don't know if a Black woman, being that her child is by a white man, if she put down white. So I don't know. I never asked that. So I don't know. But I do certainly know if the mother is white, she can put down white. Hold on, guys.
Well, the bottom line is none of us have white skin.
Mm-hmm.
We all have Black in us. Dave's friend George that he was talking about, he has blonde hair and blue eyes, and both of his parents were Black.
Yeah.
Very dark Black.
Yeah. And that happens. That
Yep.
happens. And you could have, like, for two white people, you're not going to get dark out of that, but it depends on the thing. So that's the whole thing that we keep talking about, is that being Black, a person of color, we are a melting pot. Like you said, he come out white and it's two Black parents. And that happens in our culture. We could have white, light skin, dark. It's like we're the canvas. And so that is the fight that we think about, even on to death. We can have our bodies out a week, a month or something. We don't turn, depends on how they prepared the body, but we don't turn dark. But then when a white person dead, they turn Black right away. The skin is Black.
Yeah.
And so I really try to stay out of the Black white thing. I look at as a person, like she said, do not go and say we're colorblind. We got to stop saying that, because I do see the color. Ro, you have anything? You're muted. Okay. Oh, I guess you have noise back there. So we're talking about the other one. So that racism, defining racism, we had a lot on that brought out a lot of stuff. I guess that still ties into the identity, the complexity of identity. And so that's where we go to next. Ro, are you ready?
Yeah, I couldn't get back to the unmute.
Okay.
Again, going back just to defining racism and the experience I shared with you, how I had to go from that, as a young teenager, was I had to learn to experience cultures beyond that incident, because I grew up where my parents did not want me to be tainted by that experience. And I think often that's what happens, is that individuals become tainted by one experience, and they forget that everybody is not alike. So for me, even though that was probably the defining moment of understanding racism, it did not keep me from moving past it. So I think if we go and we think about, why did this author write this book? She does really want us to move past it, but she doesn't want us to hide those difficult conversations underneath a rug and pretend they don't exist. So for me, after that incident happened, my parents instilled in me, move past it. My father had to move past the anger and the frustration that he felt about losing his nephew. They went on to teach me that, just to love people. It does not matter, what color they are, love people. And learning that, they also allowed me to see that after you get to that point where you see people for who they are, you're going to be able to meet those people who are going to let that they're not going to like you regardless of whether you're, colored pink, purple, or polka dots. There's just going to be something about you that they're just not going to like. And when I learned to distinguish those things, I learned that, racism is a matter of ignorance, of not getting to know that person, of not getting to experience their culture, and you experience, vice versa, you experiencing their culture. And I think that's what America has got to do. They cannot lump everybody into one big group and say, oh, I'm just not going to like this group of people. We've got to be able to experience each other individually and get to know each other on that basis. And I think that's what I got out of this book, but I also got that out of my parents, and that's what they taught me.
That's true. Even with me, my kids wasn't raised in a predominantly Black area. We were military, so we was raised in a diverse area. So my kids, they didn't get to live in the hood, although where we lived at, being military, we lived in the hood, but it was nice then. It was gangs on both sides. It was Crip on one side, Blood on the other side. Those are the gangs. And so they never messed with us. We can walk, get out early in the morning. That at that particular time in the 80s, they pretty much protected family, although they were a gang. And so with having that, we just went from place to place, very diverse. But when we went to Vallejo, California, we was in Long Beach, California. We went to Vallejo, California, and there was a girl, she was in the back and she was talking to my kids. And so I guess they were from Louisiana, somewhere where they from the South. And so the daughter was raised racist. So she kept calling my kids the N-word and stuff like that. And I went outside, I was like, what is going on? And that was their personal encounter with that. And I told her, oh no, we do not do that. And so where it was like civil, it was military housing, but on a civilian sector. So had we been on base, that would have been cut from the start, and their father or parent or mother, whoever was in the military, could be demoted, because the military did not play that, not at all.
Ellen, I'm going to have to tell another experience that I don't have, but that a 77-year-old man shared with me, who converted to be Muslim. He murdered someone as a 20-year-old, went to prison for life, converted to be Muslim. Oh, I was working as a physician in the prison. And I know they talk, there's a lot in the book about prison and how it's unfair, and there's a higher percentage of Blacks. And he looked at me one day and he said, I deserve to be here, whether it's fair or not the color of my skin. I deserve to be here because I killed a man. And I've converted to Islam, Islam really. And he said, and now I have a purpose. And he goes, in prison, everybody needs a gang. If you don't have a gang, you'll be killed. He goes, and at this prison, one of the gangs is to be a member of Islam. And I go to every young man who walks in the door, and I try to get him to convert and pray to God. And he goes, because my whole goal is that some of those young men, when they leave here, don't come back, because they need to learn that they need self-respect and they need to respect God. And if they don't, they're never going to beat the system that they were put into, because they grew up in the hood where they had to have somebody to be on their side. And so they got involved with the wrong people and the wrong things. And I have to tell them they can't go back and be the wrong thing and the wrong person. If they go back to the same place they lived, they have to walk down the street and say, I'm not part of this gang that's going to shoot me. And they have to go in and start talking to other young Black men and tell them, you've got to find a way back to God. He goes, now, I read the Bible every day too. He goes, it works better when I approach them as a Muslim, because they don't even understand me. But I don't care if they get back, because I'll send the same guy to read the Bible. Because I don't care if he comes out of here a Christian, or if he comes out of here Muslim, or if he comes out of here Jewish. I don't care, as long as he puts God on his side. So when he goes back, he walks down the street believing I'm good and God loves me, and it doesn't matter whether you like my color of skin or not. And this one young man at 77 would come in. Every time I went in, he would come in and sit down and say, hey, Doc, what's happening in your life? And then he'd say, and I had 3 young men join Islam this week, and I'm working, and I've been telling them, you're not Islamic only from 7 to 3 when you're walking in the yard. You're Islamic when you go back to your room. And so you're whoever's in your next bunk is one of God's creation, and you love them.
Wow.
Beautiful man, and he was there for life because he committed murder.
Wow.
Those are the things that somebody has to do. Somebody has to stand up and say, God
Right.
believes in you. You need to believe in you.
Yeah. And that's the only thing that will fix it. Hatred is not going to fix it.
No.
Killing
No.
one another is not going to fix it. But loving the way God wants us to love, that's what's going to fix. And it could kill us, but we got to understand that it's not going to help hating. And I said earlier on a different thing that I was on, I'm not going to spend, and I do mean this, Dave and Carla, I'm not going to spend my Black life hating. I'm not going to be hating no white person, no Black person. I'm going to enjoy my 2 grandchildren. I'm going to enjoy my life. Hatred is such a prison to live in. And I've seen people that hate so bad that their mouths look like they growling like a dog. And they just hate for no reason. So now we're going to talk about the chapter 2, the complexity of identity. And I want to start off with saying this. What does it, for all of you, for all of us, what does it feel like since society says that Black and white cannot be together? And when you see a biracial or a mixed couple, what does it make you feel like? And I'll say that first myself so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. When I see a mixed race or a white man, a Black man with a white woman, I smile. I smile at them, and sometimes there's time where I go, I hurt for them because society doesn't agree with it. So something in my skin go like, oh, I hope they can endure that. And with my own self, I remember 8th grade, going to high school, almost this guy, he's Mexican, I'm Black. And he liked me, I liked him, but I lied and said I had a boyfriend because I didn't have the strength to love past racism. I did not have that. And I could not deal with that. And that would always be my thing. And I would be afraid that if we did get together, you ain't got but one time to call me the N-word, just one time. If you even sneeze like you go say it. And that's just me. That's just me, and I'm being honest. And so I didn't want to have that. And I think you should be with whoever you want to be with, but I couldn't love past the racism. I don't have that much energy to fight the world like that. What does it feel like when you see a mixed person, Black, white together? What does that feel like?
I know this will sound strange. I look at their body language, and if they love each other, I just smile. You can tell those people who are out in public together and they're uncomfortable and they lean like this. But if they're a white and a Black couple and they lean like this, I could care less. I'm just happy. George, the guy I told you about, is married to a white woman. Jessie, when she came, that's their daughter. I wouldn't have guessed Jessie was Black until I got to know Jessie a little longer, because Jessie straightened her hair a lot. And when I met Jessie out of the office one time over at their house, because their young daughter, she hadn't straightened the hair and it curled up more. And I thought, oh, yes, Jessie, I could tell that you actually are Black, but it's okay. I don't know any difference. Jessie was a cheerleader on the same team with my stepdaughter. I mean, it didn't exist here the same way.
No, and it's different in a small town.
Yeah.
In big city, it's more, they're separated. I remember my father's sister, even at 85 years old, she said, oh, cousin so-and-so's getting married and they're not Italian. And I thought, oh, come on, this is the 90s and you're still separating everything out. I just don't understand it. It makes no sense. Love is love.
Absolutely. Love is love. And I support that.
My former husband once said to me, I could never marry a Black person. Of course, I said former. And I said, how can you make that statement? How do you know who you're falling in love with? It's not planned. You fall in love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ro?
Ro, you put yourself on mute.
I'm
Okay, I can hear you now.
my touching my mouse and it goes off of mute and it seems like it just goes back on there. Again, I have to go back to the neighborhood in which I grew up in, and it was a melting pot neighborhood. And everybody there, you know, like I said, we were all working class. Um, and there was a family who lived 2 doors down from me where the father was Black and the mother was white, and they had 2 children. One of them looked white and one of them looked Black. And there was this animosity between the 2 brothers. And it was almost as if one thought one was more privileged than the other, simply because, you know, they came from the same 2 parents. But at that time, I think one was treated a lot different than the other one.
Mhm.
So, and again, that was one of my first experiences with individuals who were living a life coming from 2 different races. So as a young girl, I wondered, you know, like, well, what do they call themselves? Are they Black or are they white? You know, and my mother would always tell me they're a little bit of both.
Mhm.
Okay. So as I grew and I got older and like going away from college, there really wasn't a lot of interracial couples. But when you did see interracial couples, you would see a Black man with a white woman. And I remember because at that period of time, I was really into reading Toni Morrison, Nikki Giovanni, and a lot of authors who really stood for, like, you know, finding your Blackness and knowing who you were as a Black individual. And I was in that. I was always the artsy type who was always hanging around artsy people, you know, who read those types of books. And I remember a couple where I said that the guy was Black and the woman was white, and people being angry and wanting to know, like, why can't he find somebody who's Black? You know, why is he going to go outside of his race to find somebody, you know, who's white? And going back to my background and, you know, the incident that I grew up with, it didn't really matter to me. And I'm thinking, like, what's it your business? Why are you angry?
Yeah.
And it took me a while to understand their anger. And that's what I had always focused on. It's like, are they paying any of your bills? You know, are they putting bread on your table? You know, but that was the era in which I grew up, where I saw a lot of, especially young Black women who were angry with Black men because they were going and they were dating white women.
Mhm.
And I think that really stemmed from the fact that they felt that, you know, that whole white privilege thing of, you know, like, what are they getting from white women that they're not getting from Black women?
Nothing.
And that's a whole other box of nuts. I don't
Mhm.
want to get it.
Mhm.
But that's true, Rose, because you're bringing me right into where where I want to be talking at. So that sets the stage for me. I remember growing up as a kid, and I would hear the Black mothers tell their sons, when you get older, I want you to marry a white woman so you can marry up.
Oh.
And so when you see a Black girl and she's with a white man, in that time, they say that must be her pimp. Not that's her man, that must be her pimp.
Mhm.
her drug pusher or something like that. Then as years go on a little bit further, you would see that they would say, oh, the Black man has a white woman, that's his trophy. So all those things, and then you have the Black woman moving up to today, you still see in society where, you know, this woman of color, she Black woman or whatever we call ourselves nowadays, she's looking good, she's looking fine, she was with this man, for some reason he didn't bring her up with him. You know, you have the Kardashians and you have all those others, and you have that, and then the woman says, you know, well, I'm Black and I'm all this, and then you go up and you don't bring her up. And as the same time, we see those things happening now, that we look at that and we ponder, wow, this woman, and there was a statistic, I don't know if you guys heard that, the statistic said that, I don't know what the number to the statistic was, but it says that a white woman can get married maybe 2 to 3 times in her life before a Black woman has at least one husband. And I don't know what the statistic is, but that's a lot of things that we like. So it's a lot of thick, rich, stereotype things that's going on in the community that we war against each other. And then like it still asks our identity. So growing up, we see like on television, we may want to go to Africa, but they show Africa on TV as they're barbaric, and you don't want to go there because there's the spears and all this. Whereas the flip side, they show Africa the same way we are so that we won't be together. And here's my question to all of you guys, that what was, let me get back to it, where they talk about the second part of it, the identity. Did any of you, I know, of course, Ro being Black, so we find ourselves have to say, especially when we go to school, we have to say that we're Black. Anything on television, they'll say the Black newscaster, or why can't you just be a woman newscaster, but she has to be identified as the Black newscaster. She just can't be a woman. Whereas if you're a white newscaster, they don't say, hi, this is Carla Sullivan, and she's our white newscaster.
Yeah.
So it tells in the books, and it talks about that we have to be young, identifying that we're Black. Whereas if you're white, you have to identify that you're white.
Oh, I got into a major discussion on labels. I said to my CEO, you know, we were doing a 40th anniversary celebration for our agency, and I had to speak, and they give you talking points. So I got the talking points, and in my talking points was the term BIPOC. And it's a term that our national chapter uses a lot. And I said to her, I don't like the term BIPOC. So they hand me the piece of paper, I go up on stage, and I say diverse communities instead of the word BIPOC.
Very good.
Good.
And I just kind of got this look like, because it was the national standard of the term that they wanted to use. And I thought, I'm not slapping another label on myself or any group of people, you know, and I refuse to do it. I don't care whether you hand me a piece of paper and say, this is the term that I need you to use because it's what national is saying. So when I start to think about, you know, all the labels that have been slapped on all people, you know, over so many years, is that we've got to get away from labeling ourselves. You know, again, it's like, just like you said, if you cut me, I'm going to bleed red. If I cut a white person, they're going to bleed red. But I also think that in our society, we have been geared to pointing out the differences instead of blending in with those differences. And I think as long as we channel those differences into something negative, they're going to remain that way. Think about our kids, millennials in particular, like my son is 23, my daughter is 29, and they went to a predominantly white school. And I've always been the type of mother where like my kids' friends were always welcome. So my son brings home kids who are Hispanic. He brings home other Black kids. He brings home other white kids, and I treat them all the same. Like, okay, you want to eat, you eat, And that's the mentality that they've all grown up with.
I like it.
But I also think is that what we do is we muddy the waters because we've had so much baggage, like I could have very well muddied his waters by influencing him with the whole story I just told you about my cousin.
Yeah.
And putting, everybody in one bag and saying, oh, all white people are all Chicanos or whoever have done this to us. So let's treat them all that way.
Right.
So I think we have got to get to the point where we allow our next generations to understand, yeah, you're going to encounter racism. You're going to encounter discrimination, but you've got to distinguish where it's coming from. And once you distinguish where it's coming from, then you act accordingly. You don't put a band or a cookie cutter label on everybody and assume, well, them white people going to treat us this way. So this is how I'm going to treat them. And I think that's my biggest issue is that that's where society is going. Society is not allowing, especially like with law enforcement. We all know the big issue there. So a Black person sees a police officer and assumes that this police officer is a bad cop. You see what happens on television. We all lump everything together. So I think we've got to start allowing our next generation to understand individualism.
Well said, Ro.
Very well said, Ro.
Yep, totally agree.
Yeah.
This is completely a little bit different. I didn't tell anybody on this particular show that I actually worked as a nurse before I went back to medical school. And I had the label every day I was still a nurse as a male nurse. They put that in there. Now it's kind of strange because the male nurse is privileged. I know this sounds really strange, but in nursing, the first day I walked into the hospital after graduating, they asked me to be on a special committee. They started telling me how someday I would be running the building. Again, there's a male privilege that still exists in this country.
Yes.
And it worked even in a profession that was female dominated. They expected the male nurse to move up the ladder faster.
Wow.
And those kind of labels don't do anybody any good, just like Rob said. None of those labels did any good.
So who we are.
It's who we are. Absolutely, Carla.
So what do you think, all of us on here, what do you think it's going to take just from us? I know we have to talk, it's going to be further talk and different things like that. So what can we as a person, a human being, what do you think it's going to take for us to not, as you say, label just because I see that you're white and because of ancestry that these two white people, they're coming to hang me or something like that. And then let's flip the script. Let's flip the script because when I see a white person, I don't think that you're coming to hang me. I don't think that those things, and I'm wondering as a Black person in the eye of a white person, do you see me as a slave when I come to you? Do you think that my life is not worthy? What makes my Black skin be so hateful in this world, not society, in this world that my skin is such a threat. And the only thing
Programming.
that I can say as a Black person, I would say, you know, because you two are white, I would just say, do my skin remind the eyes that you've seen to hang me a reminder that it has to be getting rid of, because anything Black is bad. Even to our sports thing, if you guys remember, not too long ago, there was a cat that walked across the field. I forgot what sport it was. They shut the whole thing down because a Black cat walked across the field.
It's crazy.
But do you guys remember that?
I
So
do.
it's
I
like
do.
anything that's Black, even is embedded into our minds. I see a Black cat and they live in my yard, which I didn't know. I just be still. It's something about it's embedded in us. Something Black means to stop and it's bad. And so I'm like, why does everything Black have to be bad except a Black tuxedo? That's sharp. Everybody wants a Black tuxedo.
Or the little black dress.
Everybody wants that. So
Yeah.
what is it going to take? What do we think it's going to take? Ro, Carla, Dave, what is it going to take?
The first thing, and I'm not a politician, but the first thing is we can't guarantee equality of outcome, but we have to give equality of chance. There has to be, and so if the inner city schools have their tax structure set up so that they're only going to get X amount of dollars and the suburb is going to get X amount of dollars, we have to do something to equal that out. Because every kid going to school should have some equal opportunity to graduate, get a good education. So we have to start somewhere with education. We have to start somewhere with the church, and we have to start somewhere with the families. That means predominantly white families have got to be able to talk about it and say, it doesn't matter that they're Black. It's got to be Black families saying, it doesn't matter that they're white. We're not in a different tribe. Because as soon as they put us in a different tribe, then we start both thinking, well, one of the tribes has to win. And there's no winner in any war. Both sides lose. One side might win the war, but does it, depending on which term, still develops the karma or performs the sin that allows them to win. And so somewhere we have to overcome those things. And the only way you can overcome those is if you don't believe that my tribe is against yours, or that I even have a tribe. I'm not male nurse or physician or member of the American Medical Association. I'm just a human. And I have my personal relationship with God, and so does Ellen, and probably Ro, and I know Carla does. And though whatever that relationship is, God doesn't care what color I am.
And having said that, a lot of it is personal integrity. And you have to have self-respect. And you have to remember that we're responsible for our own actions. And, when I was 13 years old, again, we talked about this, Ellen, my family's really poor. Our Christmas presents came from the fire department. I didn't even have pierced ears. So when I was 13 years old, my girlfriend and I went on this stealing spree one day. And we got to a department store and we were stealing all these pierced ears. And like I said, I didn't even have pierced ears. I was probably just crying for attention because my parents gave me none. And two Black security guards, women, one grabbed me by one arm, one grabbed me by the other, and they dragged me away. I didn't care if they were Black. I cared that they caught me. But it didn't make me prejudiced. It just made me, a nervous wreck. And of course, my mother didn't say, well, those Black women got you. My mother they did you a favor. So you have to take responsibility for yourself. That's all there is to it. Nobody wants to, but we have to.
Ro?
David, I think you're absolutely right. I think there continues to be the war of the races, and I think somebody's got to be big enough to say truce. Somebody has to be willing
Yes.
to throw down, the flag and say, okay, how do we mend the fences? But I also think too that there's still got to be that opportunity for these discussions, because you can't mend fences unless you have these real discussions and lay lay the bitterness on the table and figure out, okay, this is what happened. This is, if we want to go back to the whole reparations issue and thinking about, okay, it's not your fault that my people were slaves. You weren't even born then. I wasn't even born then. So why do we have to go back to like, we want you to pay, and I guess I've struggled with that whole critical race theory, where
Me
people are
too.
going with it. Now, I absolutely love history. In fact, that's what I write. I
Mm.
focus so much on what has happened on the past and how the past has helped us remember what's happening today. And I do think it needs to be taught, and I think our kids need to know,
Mhm.
but I think they also need to know it was the past. And in order to make changes from what happened in the past, we've got to create a new future. And in order to create a new future, we've got to make some changes. In order to make some changes, we've got to take a look at where we're at. If we don't take a look at where we're at, we're never going to get to where we could be. And I think, the new, and I still go back to the new generation of the millennials and how they've got a voice now. And and I don't want to call myself, I'll call myself the gentler generation. We've got to be able to help them sort through and stop blaming.
Yeah.
And we've got to let them make a new path. We've got to let them be the warriors who throw down the white flag and say, truce, let's come together and talk. But I do think it comes from the older generation of not putting our self-fulfilling prophecies onto them and causing them to feel that certain way. Because I truly believe, we mold our children into what they become.
Mhm.
So there's been a lot of molding, that has not been good molding. And once you mold a person that way, it's kind of hard to unmold them.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's the biggest problem. We start from, the moment they're born. We teach them to be dependent on us because they are,
The program.
and then we start to program them. And I hate to say that that's what's happening, but if your parents are racist,
Either way.
you're going to end up being racist
Mhm.
because you're going to hear the language too often.
Mhm.
And you need to have the conversation. If they hear somebody being racist, you can't be afraid to say
What's
they
wrong?
are uneducated and do not understand the situation. And say, it's just the amount of melanin in the skin. Look into their dark eyes and tell me that the eyes aren't the same beautiful as yours.
And as my mother used to say, we all put our pants on one leg at a time, and we all have to sit on the toilet.
I'm loving them too already. So Carla and Dave, they are in our book club, as we say, and we are a diverse book club, and that's how we are. We read diverse books. We don't just read all Black books. We read diverse book. But everything that you both, all of you, Ro, Queenie, she didn't get to say much. I think she had to go because she got to work tomorrow. But everything is beautifully said. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation what would you guys say to Beverly Daniel Tatum based on this book? What would you say to her if you had to say something to her? And
Well, the first thing I'd say is that I would have preferred the title to be, "Why are all the children in the cafeteria segregating themselves by race?" First off. And the other thing is, and I kind of agreed with you in the very beginning, there were so many statistics. It was so overwhelming. And after about the 8th or 9th chapter, we too went to Audible because it was easier to listen. I kept reading the same thing over and over again because it's so much to take in. And I was so glad at the end that she was including everybody, because there's so much prejudice out there. It has been, and it needs to stop.
yes.
And maybe if it was a little shorter, it would have been a little easier.
Yeah.
But I think it does what it's supposed to do, as far as, even as someone's white, I couldn't read it and not be uncomfortable. Okay, so it made me question everything I think all the way through the book.
Which it's supposed to.
Which it's supposed to.
Mhm.
And if that's what, and that means that I could say, I remember this, I'm thinking about this. No, I didn't worry about that. I never really thought about that. Realizing that I was brought up in a different environment than some inner city kids, where they have a whole different experience. And again, maybe I had the right teachers, and maybe I had the right teachers in nursing school and the right teachers in medical school, because they kept telling me the most important thing is to realize and understand that people aren't different by the color of their skin. They may be different by their culture. And you can't judge anyone's culture because you didn't live it. And those are really the right things. And, it's, I'll tell you this because it's a Hispanic or Latinx issue. In Hispanic, they told me that yes, they have a slightly higher diabetic rate. And it's because they were hunter-gatherers for longer and it's protective. Well, then you realize, just because their diabetic rate is, it's not because they're unhealthy or because they're Hispanic or Latinx. It's because they used to be hunter-gatherers longer. Indians have the same problem. They were hunter-gatherers longer. And so they have a little bit higher percentage of being diabetic, because having a high blood sugar is protective when you're hunting. Okay. Then they culturally have some different issues. For a Latinx man to have an amputation and lose a leg means he's no longer whole. It's very cultural, because they can't historically provide, and it's important that they provide in their culture. Well, you have to learn that there is some things in medicine when you're treating someone whose culture will affect them. Well, I'm thankful that there was somebody in my medical school who was trying to teach me these things. And the same thing is true if we're talking about black and white or red or yellow or whatever the color of the skin. If you come from a cultural place where you feel you're not privileged, then when you come into my office, I'm going to treat you as like a professional physician, regardless of the color of your skin, because it has nothing to do with how the blood is flowing in your heart. And so maybe I had some of the right teachers, and I'm just like to point that out, because in some places they don't. And teachers are making a difference, whether it's in grade school or kindergarten or college or high school. We've got to teach all of our teachers part of what's in this book, and not let the history disappear, much like Roe is interested in history. If we let the slavery history die and we don't tell anybody, nobody understands how we got to here.
Mhm.
And so I don't know that we need to knock down every statue in the South, because sometimes the statue in the South reminds us that the story happened. We can't let the story go away. We can't destroy the history, because if we destroy the history, we may repeat the problem.
Yeah, I do agree. Like here where I live at in Virginia, some of the schools they have a name change because of the systemic racism and because of what it stood for. And I was thinking to myself, if you change the name, where would the history start? Are we going to not talk about that? And I
Anymore.
think, like you said, David, I think we need to talk about it, because it's like, to me, it used to be a red house on the corner. So now I have to say, go to the right where the red house used to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where it used to be. So it's still talked about the intended purpose of where it was and where it was. We just need to have that talk. We need to have that talk that, okay, yes, and this is what I was taught, and I don't know what you guys was taught, but we came over on the ships and they saw that this is what I was taught, like in hearing, not necessarily in books, but in hearing, that they came over and they saw that we could stay in the sun, we as people of color could stay in the sun long, and they start profiting for that, although they brought us over for, and some of us sold ourselves for indentured slavery, or just, to work out and different things like that. So that's what we need to say, okay, we need to come over here. And they say, go back to Africa, when America was built on the backs of slaves.
Mhm.
And so when Ro was talking about earlier that we want retribution and all that stuff, I wouldn't even know who. I'm not trying to be funny, but this might sound funny, but I don't know who family they're gonna give the money to first. Is Ro gonna get some of that retribution? Am I gonna get some of that retribution? Who's gonna get it? Is every Black born that's coming, who all born and just coming out of the womb? Do they count the people coming out of the womb? And I know it sounds crazy, but who is going to be counted to get that retribution?
Mhm.
Who is it? And so I look at that, and I think we need to have the talk like we're having now. We need to tell the truth. And so, like, when history, and I hear some things now, some stories that I've never heard before of what Black people did. Now, I hear the lynching all the time. I'm going to be 60 this year. So I'm like, okay, tell me something else other than we've been lynched. What did this Black person do? They said the first open heart surgery was by a Black man, but he doesn't get credit for it. And now they said somebody white did it. And I think they said the light was the invention by a Black man. So we don't hear the things of what we've done, but we hear about the lynching. So we need to go beyond the lynching and tell us the stories. And I see people doing on TikTok and Instagram, they do different history that we never heard of. There's more than slavery, what we did. So is it to, or was afraid that my Black man mind can achieve? It doesn't mean that because I'm Black that I can't be taught or learn anything because I'm Black.
Mhm.
And then you have, like, in college, they go to school, they go to college, and you have all the different stereotype things that's happening now in our society now on college campus. And then now we have virtual, and now you have a group of people, Black and white people, little kids that went to school. And then now we had what happened in 2021. Now they get to see Trayvon, he got killed, and all this other stuff. And it's like, he was just going in his neighborhood and his father lived there. Then you see George Floyd, he had $20, it might've been fake, and then he's killed right in front of us. So I think we all have post-traumatic stress syndrome, all of us, all of our American head, especially of a Black person, we were just made to, we learn to adjust. Whatever is happening in society, and what, like I said, I'll be 60 this year. I look at it and I say, still happening, adjust. And we shouldn't have to adjust, but that's what we're taught as a people of color, to adjust to what is going on in society. Somebody might walk past, if a white person have on a black backpack in a trench coat, and the same thing, a person of color walking, he's gonna be stopped. He's the real criminal, probably. He's got a backpack and a bomb. This guy got his lunch and his book bag, but it doesn't look the same to society. So we just have to stop. We have to stop doing all this. Ro, what would you say to, and then we're gonna talk about your book after Ro. Ro, what would you say to Beverly? And I'll say a little bit, what would you say to her for writing this book?
I definitely think her book is a catalyst for these difficult conversations. It's not the first book that I've read where the author gives you so much information, and after you read it, you put it down and you just kind of go, whoa, that was a lot. But then when you start to dissect it, you know, many of these things I've encountered in my own life, I have to go back and think about like, yeah, that has happened to me. But, you know, I kind of not necessarily shrugged it off my shoulder. I kind of analyzed it and thought, where am I going with this? How do I want to deal with it? And what do I want to be able to digest and share that's productive with it? So I think it's a catalyst because it brings all those concerns that we have as diverse people to the surface. And it gives us something to start those conversations on, as many other authors have done. I remember right before the pandemic, participating in a book discussion, and I can't remember the book right now. But it was a really, really interesting book. And it kind of left me with the same feeling as this book, was that there was so much information out there, that there were these authors who combined everything that we were living and put it all together. So it kind of like hits you all at once. You know, like as a Black woman, I've encountered a great deal of racism, not racism, sexism, but it doesn't all hit me at one time. It hits me in bits and pieces. Like, okay, it didn't happen to me today, but 2 weeks ago it happened to me. It may not happen to me tomorrow, but it may happen to me a month from now. So what the book does, it reminds us, you know, that we can't necessarily forget because a lot has happened, but it gives us a way to dissect and digest what has happened and to be able to interpret it in our own way. And I'm sure there are a lot of individuals who have read this book, and what it did was stir up a nasty bowl of anger for them. And they begin to digest and to take that anger out on others because it reminded them. So I think it's a catalyst to remind us what we have all lived through, but it gives us an opportunity to figure out how we're going to digest it and how we're going to reflect in it. So that's what I got out of the book.
Mm-hmm. And see, again, for those of you who are looking on, and we've been on for a while, and it was much needed. It was much needed. And so for those of you that are looking on, we're talking about a national bestseller, and Beverly Daniel Tatum book. This is in his 20th anniversary of this edition. She do bring us up to date to 2020. And it's why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria and other race, conversations about race. And it just brought to my mind, when I first opened the book and I first looked at the book cover, I was upset. I didn't know if I wanted to open it. As I would start to listen to the statistics, I was looking at that, and then I was like, but I'm glad I got my audio. And so I was like, intrigued by the information and knowing that what got me was, yeah, that happened then, but it's a lot of current stuff that's happened now that's still there that let me know it's just right over our shoulder, just right over our shoulder. So she really wrote a beautiful book to help us to spark, like Ro and David and Carlos said, to spark our, well, I guess you can say our sensory or our nerves to it just raise your hair on this subject. And it's either we talk about it or we squash it, or for people of color, you're going to see it and you'll see all that statistic and things, and you be like, okay, we're still here. Do I want to hear this again? Is the same old humdrum. So when you start reading the pages and you see how, for me, how we got there and how we see the different things, and it shows you this is happening because of we are not embracing each other culturally. I shouldn't have to strip you of being Black because you're different and your color is different. I should say, hey, what are you eating over there? What do y'all eat? You eating some beans and cornbread? Oh, well, we eat tortillas and this and that. Okay, let's switch and let's do it. And so we learn from each other's culture instead of stripping stuff. Now, I have to be honest, when she talked about European, and when we say we know we got Asians have culture, Mexican have culture, Blacks have culture, and you can name different type of people of color that have culture. And then when it comes to like white, I hear, you know, European, but really what is the culture of a white person other than saying I'm European? I don't know. So now I have to ask you two, what is the culture of white? Is it European? Do you have a culture such as, you know, you have Indian, you have, you know, all those that I named, the different brown people with culture. What is the culture of a white person?
I'm going to tell you, Ellen, it depends. And it's sort of, if you look at Carla, who grew up Italian, she can cook like you can't believe, incredible food. I grew up in Iowa, and yes, we love cornbread, okay? And there aren't that many Black people, but we are farmers, teachers and doctors and business people like everywhere, but there's a lot more farmers. We eat beef and potatoes and corn, and we go to church on Sunday. And in my little town, everybody went to catechism every Thursday night because there were so many Catholics in our town, and that was church night, and nobody practiced.
German.
Yeah. So the culture for me was whatever your community says goes. And so our community went to church and our community went to college, and we were a little town. And so you got used to having Mrs. Smith. If you got on your bike and you rode 5 miles across town to baseball practice and it was raining, Mrs. Smith picked you up and put your car in the back of her trunk and drove you home because she knows your mom. Because she didn't want you to ride your bike home. That's how we grew up. You could walk wherever you wanted. You know, 50 years ago, you got home, you didn't have a key to your house because you never locked the door. It was a different world. You know, or you walk down the street and, oh, my favorite story is I'd mow the lawn on some day and I'd be getting done and it would be hot, and Dad would yell out the window, you know, Mrs. Smith has her husband had surgery. Okay, I'm gonna push the lawnmower over and I mow Mrs. Smith. And I pushing the lawnmower back toward home, and he goes, and you're young, and you know, she's retired next door too. And behind us, they went on vacation. That you should mow their, you know, I might be out there for 8 hours mowing the yard because that's how I was raised. So is that culture? I'd say yes. You know, and when I did something wrong, I had to be punished somehow. I ran a stop sign in my bike with my bike when I was 10, and my dad took it away and he bolted it to the ceiling of the garage and said, "You can't have the bike this summer because you're responsible for your own actions." That was the culture in Iowa.
That is a beautiful depiction. I guess we just don't think about all that. We think about just other things. And you got me thinking, Dave, it depends on where you came from, your upbringing.
Yeah.
Yes.
It depends on where you could be white and living in a Black neighborhood. They may consider you as white trash. And they'll say, stop acting Black. Or a white person, like Rose said, her kids would have stop acting white. We have to figure out, you know, is a person acting white, or are they acting Black or white when they're a product of their own environment?
Correct.
So this is just, I'm enjoying this. We're gonna get to your book, otherwise we'd be here 3 hours, I believe. It's 10 right now. And so guys, again, this is Dave and Carla. They're in our book club, and they are also author and co-authors. And their book here is, and that concludes our book here, what we're talking about. So we're done with that one. Thank you guys for watching it there. Let's see what's on the board before I do it. Early conversation, Candace, she said, we talked about how we're going to get this together, how we're going to mend this together, what is going to be the conversation. Rose said, just talking about it and doing what we're doing. And I believe it was Carla that said, personal integrity is the key. And that's what Candace do agree to that. And Dr. Velma said, good evening. And so I want to tell you what's on the feed. So we're introducing to you guys our newest 2 book club members. I dare not touch y'all last name, but Carla and David, co-writers, and this is the book that they've written, and this is our March book, The Gift of Past Lives, with Mother Isabella, I hope I said that right, God and Elizabeth. So tell us about your book, just what we're in for.
So this may be different than many of your readers have listened to. It is a spiritual book related to our own personal spiritual experience and discovering 29 past lives that we have had together. Certainly this is a different than many of the people on your site may have heard of. We've gone on to write 3 books, The Gift of Past Lives, Hell No, Reincarnation, and the 3rd book is the manual that talks about how God helps us plan each and every successive life. The goal is still the same as every Christian out there, which is to grow, overcome adversity, live a good life, love your neighbor as yourself, and return back to God as the love in which you were created. And that's really the message of the book. It does share many of our past lives. Ro might like it because some of it is very historical, because there are parts written up to 6,000 years ago in our first book. And in our second book, Hell No, Reincarnation, we talk about David and Ariella, which is our first life. And it existed in Hebrew times, actually moved to the Ayin Getty at that time. So there's lots of interesting twists within our book that people will enjoy. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned about conceit, selfishness, jealousy, and unforgiveness. So we hope some people will join us, and we could tell them some of the research on reincarnation and some of the other history that's out there. We did write a 4th book, which is the one I first sent you, Ellen. I still want to put a plug in for that. It's Her Huba and His Rose. It is a love story. Ro might like this one too, because it's written in the First Temple period at the time of Jesus, about a couple, the Second Temple period, yes. It's a love of a couple for themselves, a love of the couple for their families, the love of the family for their God
And
and
community.
and community. And so it kind of discusses the history of Rome and Kittim soldiers who came down and
From
there's
Cyprus.
from Cyprus. So there's a lot of action and stuff in Her Huba and His Rose. So whether you want to read about reincarnation, which is what we're going to talk about some next month, Her Huba and His Rose would be is also a beautiful story that people would like to hear.
She's muted.
I'm sorry, I'm on mute. I'm gonna show this one more time. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, show yours too. Show yours too. Yeah.
It is.
I can see that glimpse. So
Yep.
tell us real quick, who is Isabella, and is God to creator? And
God is,
Elizabeth, tell us
yes,
about you.
yes. Isabella is my spirit guide, which is a communication. Spirit guides are literally the communication directly from God to you.
Okay.
So Isabella is my spirit guide. God is creator of the universe,
Intelligent designer.
the intelligent designer, the moral authority. Earlier on, I said monotheism, Unitarian. So the God of Jerusalem, Christianity, and Muslims, I'd say yes. We agree that's the God. And Elizabeth is Carla's spirit guide.
Okay. So could you tell me the name of what you said again? Because I know, because I was reading, I'm gonna be honest, after I read the back book, I said, I don't know. I said, I believe that David believes in God, but I don't know if it's agnostic, atheist.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
No, no.
I'm a
Oh,
100%
Said
believe in God.
Okay, because I was trying to see what is going on. I hadn't read the book yet. And like I said, I'm going to read it. And I was telling a friend earlier today, and we'll end out and everything, because this is going on 3 hours, I guess. But I was telling a friend of mine, and I'm learning, because I got a chance to, I'm learning to listen. I'm Christian, and I'm learning to listen. And I'm just learning that. Because if I take your book and I say, oh, I'm just not going to read this. And I know I told you that we'll agree to disagree, because I want to be honest of what I do. And you said, no problem, bring it on. And I said, I love you already. So I do
Yes.
love you two already. I don't even know you, but I love you two already. Y'all just bring such warm energy here. And so I'm going to read it. And I also learned, like, one of our neighborhood car place, auto shop. I was talking to the guy. I'm gonna talk, as you guys can see it, make the long story short, is that I was talking to him, and as I was talking to him, I thought he was Christian. But after we got through with talking to each other, he ended up telling me that he's atheist.
Mm.
And I just kind of thought, and what his response back to me was, thank you so much. You were the first person that I talked to that we didn't get into a huge confrontation, because there I learned to listen. Maybe I can learn something. And I'm not trying to convert either person. I just tell them about the Lord, and we just go from there.
Yeah.
But we always have to stand on the faith and always have an answer for our faith. So I'm paraphrasing, but I'm just going to listen. I'm going to read, and I'm going to write my notes down and everything. And we're just going to talk.
Good.
Perfect.
And that's what I'm looking forward to. Again, thank you, and welcome to our book club. Your book is our book of the month for March. And we do real quick have, I don't know if you guys know, Jacqueline Mitchell. Have you heard of her? Jacqueline Mitchell. Well, we're going to have her March 8th. So we're going to talk about this book here, and we're going to talk about her other book, Relativity, A Theory of Relativity, which is about a custody battle, nasty custody battle. Our group read this before 4 years ago or so, and this is a vintage book. We're going to talk a glimpse about this, and this is her latest book. Jacqueline's latest book is The Good Son. So we'll talk about that. This is about a murder, young love, young relationship, young violent relationship, where the son, Stefan, he murdered his best friend. They were dating and everything. And so from there, he went to jail, supposed to serve 5 years, but he served 2 of 3, 1 in good behavior. And so now in his neighborhood, the mother, she has a campaign going on about young abuse, dating. And so he can hardly go into his neighborhood because of all this is reminding him, even though you're out of jail, you still need to pay. And then there's a mystery caller that claims to have seen the whole thing and know what's going on. And she keeps getting these phone calls. I know what happened and all this stuff. And so it's I'm dramatic, as you guys can see. So it's loaded with a little bit of thriller and all that. To me, it's in suspense, and it's going down. So that, and then that one is going to happen on, like I said, March 8th. And then this is the book that we have that's going to happen on the 31st of March. And it has the abbreviation COVID, but it is, I'm gonna let y'all see it from there and I'll tell y'all. So the acronym for COVID is Come Out Valiant, Virtuous, and Victorious in spite of distress. And this book right here, we call her Dr. Her name is kind of hard to say, but we say Dr. Reese Graves. And this talks about her overcoming a survivor of domestic abuse. She aspires to empower women to see their worth through the eyes of Jesus Christ. She receives her doctorate of education from Regent University in 2018. She and her husband, Alvin, resides in Newport News, Virginia. So this is about domestic abuse. So she titled that COVID. So we'll have her on March the 31st. Also, if you guys are not busy, I don't know if I know Ro is on Instagram. I don't know if you two are on Instagram. So I'm going to have a show this Sunday. It's going to be on Instagram, and I'm going to talk to Tangi Edwards and Mike Himmel, I think that's his name. And he is, the two of them, they're not a couple. They're 2 strangers to each other, but they both have spinal bifida. So we're going to talk about spinal bifida. I'm going to ask them what are their most frequent questions asked about spinal bifida. And then they're going to tell the audience about their abilities. So that's what we're going to do. We have a full thing. So thank you guys for being here. It is a pleasure to meet you both. We look forward to digging in your stories, and that will be at the end of the month. We always, when we read our books, we go all the way to the end of the month, give us 1 month to do it. So it's not March yet. So I will tell you guys, and I'll post it. I need you to, I'll inbox you and tell you what I need from you guys.
Sure.
And then we'll post the event.
Okay.
So look forward. Thank you guys for being here. Good night to you all. And I know it's probably past some people bedtime. But again,
We're getting older.
yeah, again, Ro, what would you like to say to welcome Carla?
It was a pleasure to meet you, Ro.
Yes, Ro,
Yes, I enjoyed our discussion. It was nice meeting you both.
you too.
Yep, great discussion, great night. Again, Ro Brady earlier with Queenie Clem, Book Talk and Reviews. And now we have co-author Carla and David. I will not say their last name.
It's Bognick and Bettenhausen, but it's hard.
Thank you. That is so hard. That is so hard. Thank you for allowing me to do your say it, your first name. So we're gonna get on off of here. Thank you guys for looking in here. You can see this on there. It's gonna be uploaded. I'll share the video and stuff with you guys. And so good night to everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good
All
night.
right. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.